Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of our Excel lab. So to use this video, here's what I want you to do. Try each of them before I go over them. If you're having trouble, like your little checkbox isn't working, or you're just totally stuck, then just kind of like fast forward until I get to the part about, whatever it is you're stuck on. That way it'll sort of help you through it. For the instructions, if you got stuck on the later ones, again, make sure that you read these, because they, I don't know what I did, because they do have important instructions on there for you. So, let's go. Let's start out with this one. So, where are we? We're on Physics 2, PHY 2. So, a physics lab group has found the mass of a series of objects and the net forces acting on those objects. Complete the data by filling in the acceleration column. Okay, and again, I would normally make you use these equations or find them on your own, but here I'm just going to tell you the acceleration is force divided by mass. So, the acceleration is the force. Always start with an equal sign. Force is in B2, and we're going to divide it by the mass, which is in A2. Awesome. Click. Make sure you're on this little box on the bottom right. Drag. Awesome. Turn green. So we're going to proceed when the checkbox turns green. This was great. Again, at least a few minutes worth of work done in a couple of seconds. Okay, we're on Physics 3. We're on this tab, so I'm going to read the instructions. A different physics lab group has also been asked to determine the momentum of a series of objects. The group could not directly measure the velocities of the object, so they timed how long it took for a group of objects to travel a distance of 3.5 meters. Notice this 3.5 meters here. Complete the data tables by filling in the velocity and the momentum column. Note, and this is important, you can convert from pounds to kilograms by multiplying pounds by 0.45. So I did kind of put this in here, and I threw some equations right here. So to get the mass in kilograms, I said multiply pounds by 0.45. So we're going to type in equals. We're going to do, I think we're looking in A2, and we're going to multiply it by 0.45. Hit enter. Cool. Actually, here's something I'm going to do a little differently. No, never mind. Click, make sure you're on the bottom right part, drag, done. Velocity, alright, I gave you the equation, V equals D over T. And it's a little messier now, we're getting steadily more complicated, I've got a lot of different columns. Doesn't mean we have to use them all. Velocity is equal, so we're going to start with an equal sign, to distance over time, which I think is this cell right here. And we're going to divide it by a time of, I think it's in this cell right here. So notice we use cells C2 and D2. Hit enter. Click on this, catch that bottom right corner, drag, done. We've got all our velocities. And lastly, remember, momentum is mass times velocity. So that's what I'm going to do. Equals, mass is in, we always use kilograms, so I'm not going to use column A, I'm going to use column B. Mass times velocity, which is in cell E2. Hit enter. Cool. Click, catch that bottom corner, drag. There we go. Friction lab. All right, this one's going to be more complicated, which is awesome. So let's make sure we read the instructions. Here we are. When we completed the friction lab, so you may remember this from like December-ish, we had to calculate the coefficient of friction multiple times for different masses. You could have completed this task easily using Excel, so I made you do it by hand. We could have done it on the computer. An example data set is completed for you with a couple columns missing. Complete by using the normal force two coefficient columns. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. First, you may remember the equation for coefficient of friction is Pfaffen. When you solve for it, it turns into friction divided by normal force. So that's what we're going to do. We need to find the normal force first, and then we'll calculate the coefficients. We'll take the average of each coefficient, and we'll see if it worked. So, for our normal force, something I'm hoping you learned this year, but in case you forgot it, the force of gravity is equal to the normal force. So we're just going to solve for the force of gravity by doing m times g. This is important. In order for your checkbox to work, you have to use 9.8, not 9.81. That's just the way I programmed it for this particular activity. So m times g is, we're going to do equals because we're doing an equation. Now, so far we've been doing A2, but notice that A2 is not the right thing. See how cell A2 has the label in it? So if you type that in and you got an error, that was probably what it was. We're starting in A3. So not a huge change, but something to look out for. We're going to multiply it by 9.8. Not 9.81, again, or else this won't work out right for you. Click, drag, we got a bunch of normal forces. We're doing good so far. Now that coefficient of friction, all right, we got kind of a mess here, but we'll be all right. The coefficient of friction, mu, is equal to the force of friction divided by the normal force. So we're going to do, and again, you should remember this from class, there's a kinetic coefficient and a static coefficient. So we're going to calculate them both. Remember, the coefficient is always a decimal, smaller than 1, so hopefully we'll get something like that. So we're doing an equation, equals, and we want, again, if there's a lot happening here, just do it one thing at a time. Force of friction, we're doing kinetic. The kinetic friction is this one right here, that's column C, equals C3, again 3 because we're in row 3, divided by the normal force, which is B, right? This is B3. Decimal smaller than 1, good. So I'm going to click and drag down here. I'm not going to go all the way because you see how like this last thing just isn't, there's no data set here. I'm going to save this for the averages. Oops. Okay. The static coefficient, all right, it's still force of friction divided by normal force. So equals, but we're going to use the static force of friction, which is this column right here. Equals, what is that? It's D3 divided by C. Nope. Normal force. Normal force is B3. Hit enter. Nice. Click. Drag. Awesome. We're all decimals smaller than 1. If you remember from class, static is larger than kinetic, so this works for a lot of different reasons. Alright, now we want to take the average. Now, the average, remember, is everything added up and divided by the number of things that you added together. So you'd have to add all these values and divide by however many values there are, which is repetitive. And remember, this whole thing is designed to avoid repetitive work. So there is a shortcut to that. To take the average, type in equals average. So there's a function for this, equals. And I'm just going to type the whole word average. Average. And I'm going to highlight everything I want to take the average of, which is this kinetic coefficient column. Hit enter. And that's our average. Okay, and now I can type in the same thing here, or here's something neat that you can do. Click here, catch that bottom corner, and drag to the right. Just the same way that you would drag up and down, you can drag things left and right. And so instead of taking the average of all of these values, it takes the average of all of these values. So you've got your average kinetic coefficient and your average static coefficient. And then your checkbox turned green, so this is good. Alright, so now we're moving on to, again, I'm trying to show you like a couple things that, are different that you can do with this. So here I set up like a bunch of things for you. If you're curious how any of this worked, shoot me an email, come to office hours, and we'll go over it. But for this one, college comparison. So for these ones, please read the instructions because it's not always like super obvious what I want you to do just from looking at this. So let's say you're trying to figure out like what colleges cost, right? Rather than calculating it every time, you kind of write it all out. So it's college application season. In an effort to choose the perfect school, you create a data table in Excel to help you compare the cost of a few colleges you are considering. Complete the data table by finding the total cost, after scholarships, of each of the colleges listed. So you're applying to Harvard, MIT, Nassau Community, Princeton, Oxford, Oswego, St. John's, and Rochester. Okay. So you can kind of play around with this. One thing that I did is like is the application submitted. So like if you're trying to make it really obvious which ones you applied to, you can set it to change color. Like if you type in a 1, if you did it. Now that didn't work at all. Never mind. Forget about that feature. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to just calculate the total cost of each of these. Sorry, this was in... Oh, there we go. Type in a 1, and notice like it turns from red to green, meaning now it's good and done, and red means bad and you didn't finish it yet. So, you can kind of play around with the formatting and have this do whatever you want it to do. But what we want it to do is to calculate the cost of college. So, we've got the tuition, the room and board, and some scholarships. So let's figure out an equation that we could use to figure that out. And I know coming up with an equation sounds like a complicated thing, but let's not make it complicated. Equals to start an equation. Tuition, okay, so that's a cost, right? So the cost, that's in B9. So B9. Room and board, come on. Oh no. So for room and board is an additional cost that it would be, right? So let's do plus B10. Because, right, that's costs more, so I added it to the cost. Now, After that, we have the scholarship here, which is in B11. So we've got plus B10. Now, scholarships make it cost less, right? So here's what we're going to do. Let's subtract the cost of the scholarship, because that's like money that you don't have to pay, right? You would subtract it from the cost. So I'm going to do minus B11. Enter. So again, what I did there was I did tuition plus room and board minus scholarships. And that's it. That's what it costs. So if you want to attend Harvard, it'll cost you $39,000 a year. Totally made up numbers. I do not know if that's what it'll cost. Okay, and I want to do this for all the other ones, but again, what's great about Excel is I can just click this bottom right corner and just drag to the right. Done. Now the checkboxes I don't think are turning green anymore, so, oh, is it? Did I do something wrong? No, we're good. Is that green? Yes, it is. Okay, so sorry, the font doesn't turn green anymore because, again, I switched from Excel to Google Drive. So the fact that this background is highlighted green, that means that we're good. Yeah, cool. So now we know what it'll cost to go to each college, and there we go. Budgeting. So let's say you want to make yourself a budget, maybe for, a few months, January, February, March, April, May. You want to know like how much money you're going to have at the end, if you'll be all right, and that kind of stuff. So for budget, you are trying to budget your income and expenses using Microsoft Excel, or in this case, Google Sheets. You have already created a list of various incomes and expenses. Complete the blank columns by calculating your total income, expenses, net savings for each month. Then fill in the total money in your bank account in the blank box next to total money. So basically what we're going to do is we are going to calculate our total money at the end and see how we're doing. And if this turns green, if it highlights green, then we did it right. So let's go. These are our incomes. These are our expenses. So let's figure this all out. So we've got our salary. Drug money is a source of income for us. Tutoring, selling things on Craigslist, babysitting, birthday money. So let's figure out the total that we made. So remember, sum is a function that we can use. It gives you the sum of a bunch of values. I'm just going to highlight everything I want to take the sum of and close my parentheses. And why do this over and over again when you can click that bottom right corner, drag to the right? We've got the sum of all of these values. Total expenses. So we spend on our significant other, maybe we buy a new phone, we go out to eat, spend on Netflix, buy clothes, buy some Jordans. Well, how much does that cost us? Well, again, we're just adding some numbers together. We have a sum function for that. Sum, open parentheses, everything you want to take the sum of, close your parentheses. And again, I'm just going to drag to the right. Cool. Now we've got our total income for January, right? So this is our January column. We have our total income and our total expenses. Let's figure out how much we saved. Well, your savings is the money you make minus the money that you spend. So I'm going to do an equals, and I'm going to do this looks like B10, right? So equals B10, the money we made, minus the money we spent, B19. All right, we saved $150, which is nice. And I don't want to do this for every month, so I'm just going to take that bottom right corner, click it, drag it. Cool. This turned green. Notice it wasn't green before. Now it is, and there you go. And so you can kind of get a bunch of helpful information. To see how we lost money in April, probably because of that new phone that we bought. So you can kind of use this. There we go. A couple more. So we'll do some examples of, like a nice example where you have to do calculations over and over again is if you're a teacher and you need to calculate grades. And this one's going to be more complicated, so I'm going to refer back to the instructions a few times here. So, a group of students are taking physics. The grades for the second quarter are in the spreadsheet. So here's all of our students, their grades on a bunch of tests, a couple quizzes, the interim, which would be the quarterly, and then their final grade here. You need to tabulate the students' grades for the second quarter. To do this, determine the test average, the quiz average, and the class average for each individual assignment. The grading scheme for the class is below. So here's what we're going to do. Let's start with just finding the test average, the quiz average, and we'll go from there. So to take the average, we did use this earlier, if you forgot it. Rather than typing, B4 plus C4 plus D4 divided by however many there are, we can type in equals, and then the word average. Open parentheses, and highlight everything you want to take the average of. Close your parentheses. Okay, so for Napoleon Kaufman, this is his test average. Click, drag, done. Okay, now let's do the same thing for the quiz average. Equals average, open parentheses, I'm just only 2 values here. Hit enter. Click, drag down. This is everyone's quiz average. Alright, let's find the average for the whole assignment. So like if I want to know your class average, like if the whole class takes a quarterly and I want to know what the average is, I do it in Excel, because why would I do that by hand? So equals, type the word average, open parentheses, and I'm going to take the average of everyone's grade for this test. And then I'm going to close parentheses. And I'm going to click, and then I'm just going to drag it to the right. And now I have the average of every assignment for the year. Notice that the things with no assignments, like it doesn't like that. It doesn't, the computer does not like taking the average of no values. So I'm just going to delete that because it, I don't know, it kind of bothers me a little bit. Cool. Here's something you can do. If, see these decimals, if they bother you, because like typically your grade is not like a decimal, here's something that you can do. So I'm going to like, let's say these test averages. Let's say I want to just round it because I don't like these decimals for grades. Like, you never want to hear you got like an 84.37. You're just like, I got an 84. So here's what you can do. See these 2 buttons right here? These will round it to different amounts of decimal places. You can round it to more decimal places, but that's not really what I want to do. I just want to round it to a whole number. So I'm just going to keep clicking this until, there we go. And now it'll give you a whole number. So you can do these with all these averages too. The average will rarely work out to a whole number. You kind of keep clicking it. There we go. And now it's rounded them all to a number. So just another feature that's in there. Alright, we're looking good so far here. Okay, the grading scheme for the class is below. Tests are 50% of the grade, quizzes are 30%, the interim is 20%. To calculate the weighted average, you can do this. So here's what I'm going to do. I want to calculate everyone's grade for the second quarter. For example, your grade is a percentage, like it's 50% tests, 10% interim assignment, 20% labs, 10% tests. I hope that added up to 100. Is that how you're graded? Sorry, I just tuned that offhand. So for this particular class, it's different from what you have in your Mr. Evans physics class. Tests are 50%, quizzes 30%, interim is 20%. If you're not so, if you don't remember how to do the math, here's the equation that you would have to use. We're going to do 0.5 times the test average, plus 0.3 times the quiz average, plus 0.2 times the interim. So that's what I'm going to do in this quarter 2 grade. Equals, and I'm actually, I'm just going to type it in exactly the way it's written on this sheet right here. Except instead of the word test average, I'm going to type in this cell. So we're going to do 0.5 times the test average, which is E4. See, this one, E4. It's the one we actually just filled in. Cool. Awesome, and I'm just going to keep going. Plus 0.3 times the quiz average, which is I4. Again, it's just this one right here, I4. Close parentheses, plus 0.2 times the interim assessment, which is K4. Close it up. Alright, 86.6, which seems reasonable because we got like a test in the 90s, quiz in the 80s, interim in the 60s. That probably averages out to something in the 80s. So that works. Click, drag, and now everyone's grades are all calculated for you. I don't like these decimals for grades. You probably wouldn't either if it showed up on your report card, because it's a little annoying. So I'm just going to reduce the amount of decimals by clicking this number, and they're all kind of rounded. Now, one of the reasons this is helpful is, alright, we have a student who missed a bunch of time. So Caitlin Jenner has been absent for a long time and just made up missing test grades. Her grades on the missing assignments are below. So, again, I don't want to recalculate all of Caitlin Jenner's grades just because she was absent for a little while. I don't want that to, waste a bunch of my time doing this by hand. So I have this spreadsheet set up. Let's just type in the values, meaning, see how her average right now is a 72? I'm going to fill in this value right here, the forces test, she got an 80 on. So I'm just going to fill this in as an 80. Hit enter. Okay, see how her grade calculated for you? This average grade for the class updated automatically. Yeah, so this momentum test was a 64. Hit enter. And again, you may have noticed this changed, her test average changed, and then her quarter average changed as well. She got on quiz 2, a 90. And then on the interim, she got an 87. And there we go. So what I was trying to illustrate there is the idea that like if you set up a spreadsheet, you don't have to like it saves you a lot of work. Like if you had to redo it all, you don't have to because it's all programmed for you. You just fill in the missing values and you're all set. Your check for this, the class average for the quarter should be an 80. And there we go. The class average for the quarter, meaning quarter 2 grade average was an 80. So we did this right. Okay, last up. Grades number 2. So let's look at, for example, let's look at like curving a test. So if you guys take the midterm or the quarterly, we curve it, and I don't want to calculate it individually for all of you. That's too much work for me. So I have a spreadsheet program to do that for you. So let's do something similar. This one I played around some of the features. You notice that this top row is sort of locked, meaning like as I scroll down, you see how it's like still there. That way the heading kind of sticks with the numbers. So once you really know what you're doing here, there's tons of neat stuff you can do with this. We're really just kind of scratching the surface. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to curve a bunch of test grades. So we've got, actually let's read the instructions first. Most people don't know that every president to sit in office has taken the physics regents. Their scores on the multiple choice and extended response are listed. You are to analyze the data in a few ways. Combine the multiple choice and extended response scores into the total points column. Figure out the score, assuming we're out of 85. Since the presidents have done so poorly, we'll need to curve their scores. Alright, let's do that in a minute. So first, let's combine the multiple choice and extended response in the total points. So, okay, we're going to do equals, open parentheses. We're just going to combine, again, it just says combine the multiple choice and extended response. So that's what we'll do. Equals B2, that's the multiple choice, plus C2. That's the extended response. Hit enter. Alright, 31 plus 17 is 48, so we did this right. And again, we're not going to do this like 50 plus times. Let's just drag. Done. Cool. Percentage. So figure out the score, assuming we're out of 85. So that's this percentage right here. So it's like when you get a grade, right? If you get like a 25 out of 30 when I pass it back, what is that? Well, the way you would calculate your grade is equals. Remember, you just take the part divided by the whole. So we take the 48 out of 85. And we got a 1. That's kind of a weird response. The reason for that is I have it set to round to the nearest whole number. We forgot to. I think like if you just did 48 out of 85, you got 0.56, which it rounded up to 1. But remember, we forgot to like multiply by 100, right? Because we want to move the decimal 2 spots over. So we're going to multiply by 100, and there we go. Again, I have it set to round to a whole number. That's why it's not showing as a decimal. Basically, I played with these values before you got to this spreadsheet. Click, drag. Something went wrong. Oh, because this isn't the formula. I'm sorry. So I made a mistake. So again, rather than doing the whole thing over again, we can just type it in like this. We're going to do C... I typed in the numbers and not the thing. So we're going to do D2, the points they got, and divided by 85. There we go. So now everyone has a different grade. Scroll down, and there we go. So this is everyone's like raw grade. Like if we don't curve it at all, this is what everyone got. As a teacher, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I don't really know what to make of this. This is a lot of numbers. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the average of all the scores next. So I'm going to type in equals. Equals average. Open parentheses, and I'm just going to highlight everyone's grades. Close my parentheses, and there we go. And I'm going to drag across. Okay, so the average grade for this was a 69, which is not a good grade, so I think I'll curve this. So let's come up with like a curve equation that we could use. Since the presidents have done so poorly, we will need to curve their scores. We're going to do this by taking the square root of the percentage score, meaning the square root of this column, and multiplying it by 10. As an equation, it looks something like this. So it's, there's a lot of different equations you could use. We're just going to use this one for this test. So we're going to take the uncurved score, take the square root of that, and then multiply it by 10. So we're going to do equals for an equation. The square root we did earlier in this video, I think, or maybe the previous video, equals SQRT parentheses. We want the square root of E2. Then we're just going to multiply it by 10. Alright, 56 turned into 75. This is a pretty generous curve, I think. Click, drag, and now everyone's grade is curved. The average bumped up to an 82, so people actually passed. There we go. So we got all of our presidents and their scores. This is old. I left out Donald Trump. This wasn't meant to be a political thing. I just didn't update it in the last couple of years. Cool. Now, if you're looking at this, if let's say I want to call homes for the presidents who call the White House and tell all their moms that, tell them their sons failed the regents. Here's what I can do. I want to highlight everyone who failed. That way they're just easy to spot. Here's something neat. You can do, let's figure out who failed by highlighting the failing grades after the curve. Highlight the entire final grades column, click on Format, go to Conditional Formatting in the toolbar. Okay, so here's what we'll do. I'm going to highlight everybody's grades. And we are going to do Format. Just right-click on Format near the top. And then we're going to do Conditional Formatting. Format, Conditional Formatting. And here you can set like rules to dictate what you want it to do. So this is how I did all of the checkboxes. I had it highlight if it was the correct value. So here we're going to do format cells if we want it to be less than. So we're going to highlight the cell if it is less than a 65. Formatting style, and here you can change what it wants to say. Failing is bad, and I like bad things to be in red. If you leave it, it turns green, like all the checkboxes did. And you can have it, change the color. Finally, there's a lot of things you can do. I'm going to click done. And what's nice is now I can just really quickly see everyone who failed. You can see everyone who did great. You can have it highlight everyone who got more than a 90, so you know that went well. As our check, Franklin Pierce, Warren G. Harding. Oh, that's a type. This is doubled up. Franklin Pierce, Warren G. Harding, Franklin Pierce again, and Ronald Reagan all failed the regents. So we got Warren Harding, Ronald Reagan, Franklin Pierce, and yeah, I meant to put in Andrew Jackson instead of this Franklin Pierce. So Andrew Jackson also failed the regents. So that's it. Again, this is just like the basics of what you can do in Excel. If there's something you're trying to do that's like repetitive calculation, Excel probably has a way to do it. You can search it online, ask me, whatever it is you want to do. And again, I tried to illustrate that it's helpful for a physics or a science class because you do repetitive calculations. But if you go into business and you're balancing a budget, if you're just trying to keep track of personal things like the colleges you're applying to, if you're a teacher, we do the same calculation a lot of times. So it's a helpful thing. So it's a skill that I think you'll find helpful. It's a good resume bullet point. Oftentimes, if you're looking for a job, they'll look for proficiency with Excel, or in this case, Google Sheets. So that's it.